I think I'm gonna do a little vlog on my World of Darkness sessions so far, because doing it without actually, because I did record the sessions, but recording 2 to 4 hour long sessions and uploading them is a lot harder. I'd probably want to edit them too. Doing that kind of stuff takes me a lot more effort than just making a vlog and summarizing everything in sort of like a brief chunk. So I'd rather talk about the game that way than actually showing you the entire session, because really nobody really wants to watch that sort of thing, because it takes way too long, and it can get kind of boring because there's some dead air that I probably don't have time to edit out. So I wouldn't want to just upload the whole thing and just stick it up there and say, oh, watch this, because that's bad. But editing it is something I don't really have time to do either. So I figured, why don't I just make a vlog? So I want to talk about some of the stuff that happened in the last few sessions and how I'm planning on, developing it. I'd recommend anybody who's actually playing in this session not to watch this, but if you don't mind, some minor spoilers, or me talking about things that are going to happen, or things that the players aren't really supposed to know about, you can go ahead and watch this, and it's fine, but I really wouldn't recommend it. So first thing is, I think we started with Xanthus, and Xanthus is this sort of mage character who, at the moment, and I've sort of confirmed this recently a lot more, is that this mage character is basically very similar to Dante from Devil May Cry, in the sense that he is very good with guns and very good with melee weapons. And so he is sort of this freelance, guy who goes around solving people's problems, sort of like a Devil May Cry kind of thing. Like he gets calls from people, and they're like, "Hey, help us deal with this," and all this kind of stuff. So we started actually with the dream sequence with him, because a lot of the characters in this campaign took nightmares, and I really like doing dreamland stuff. So what happened was, I asked him, okay, so you have to make a nightmare roll to resist having a nightmare. So I want you to roll that. And I ended up getting like 3 successes, which is a lot more than I thought he'd get. So it was like, okay, so you get some kind of advantage here. Not only are you aware that this is a dream, but you're actually somewhat lucid during this dream. And so I actually gave him the ability to use lucid dreaming powers, since he had gotten way more successes than I'd expected. Even 1 would be enough for him to be aware that it's a dream and not be lucid, but he got 3, so I feel like normally that would require maybe an exceptional success, so like 5 successes, but I felt like making it more interesting, because honestly, not giving him anything for those extra 2 would have been kind of criminal. So I figured, okay, so you are somewhat aware of the fact that this is a dream, and you have some control over the dream. So when these nightmares started to attack him, like they were these giant demonic sort of looking shadow figures, he basically looked at them straight in the eye and is like, get out of here. And they actually did it, because he rolled really well on he had like presence and intimidation. So he was like just staring them down, being like, yo, back off. And they back off. So they don't attack him right away. Then the other 2 characters who can dream walk started getting into his dream. And that's when the fun stuff started happening, because then the nightmare started circling around all of them. And basically, we had this moment where my friend Raccoon's character, he's playing like this dragon who can dream walk like naturally, which is really interesting. Just sort of run up and deal with these things. Like Xanthus had taken him because he had just walked into his dream. He was like, "Who are you?" So he used his dream powers to like hold him in place with a water funnel, because the entire dream was like they were walking on an ocean, like they were physically standing on top of water and like running around. It actually was interesting, because after this, I had actually seen a thing from Bloodborne or Dark Souls, something like that, where there's a very similar level where you're running around fighting on water. I might link that in the description or something, because it was really interesting. I saw this after, and I'm like, hey, that's exactly what I had envisioned when I was thinking about this, but it was something that I found after. Anyway, so Xanthus he makes his own whirlpool to like hold this dragon in place. He's like, what the hell are you? So he makes his occult roll. He's like, oh, so you're a dragon. Okay, I understand that. Like, I get that you're a dragon. Okay, that's interesting. So you're here now in my dream. Okay, fine. So then the nightmares show up again, and then like the dragon basically uses his axe, and he's a combat focused character, so he gets like 15 dice to freaking chop this thing in half, and he freaking kills it in like almost one hit after it had been weakened. I think it had been weakened a little bit, but for the most part, it was almost a one hit kill. So we were all really impressed. I think it was a one hit kill actually, and he basically hit it so hard that he had done like I think like about it only had like 7 hit points, and he had done like I believe about like 3, 5, 12 damage to it. So I'm like, okay, so you basically cut it in half and its body flies around. Like it flies across the whole landscape and explodes into like this dread energy, which is what the nightmares are made of. Like they explode in this black Icarus sort of stuff. Kind of like the now that I think about it, it's kind of like the Prince of Persia, like how they have those sand monsters that would sort of explode, or like the ones from the Prince of Persia remake actually, where you fight them and they sort of have this ooze and black goo, coming off of them and stuff. So when they destroyed them, they kind of exploded with this black goop. Or not really goop, it's sort of more ephemeral than that, but it's not really like a liquid. Anyway, they were fighting this, and that guy took care of them really easily, and Xanthus was like, okay. So what he does is he materializes his gun into the dream because he's a gunslinger, right? Like I said. So he basically lines up a shot. He like makes his own barriers too out of like his mind. Like he makes these barrier constructs, and then he uses the barriers to like aim a shot, towards these things. Like he deflects the bullet off of one of these barriers, and it works because it's a dream, so he can defy physics. And by this point, he was already reversing gravity and doing all this ridiculous stuff, and like causing all the enemies to like float in the air, so he could target them really easily. It was really cool, and all the other characters were like floating up in the air and like had to fight in midair. And one of the other characters, who was like at the time he was in human form, but he's a werewolf with a gun. He was basically like in midair trying to shoot this thing that was coming towards him. So he had to shoot it in midair, and then when it came towards him, he freaking grappled it and like brought it, and then Xanthus made the gravity go back to normal. So he, like while they were grappling, he just started to fall, and he let go of the thing, and it crashed into the ground. It was such a cool scene. Like, I swear, that was so fun to run. And it wasn't that hard to run either. It was a lot easier than I expected, even though it involved a lot of complex stuff like reversing gravity and all that. It wasn't really reversing gravity. It was more like, sort of making it, scaling it differently. It was really cool, though. Really neat scene to run. After that, after they had dealt with this, the little things that had exploded, they'd actually dropped like these little black bullets. And so a lot of the characters who had occult knowledge started bringing them back to investigate them. And so that's a current little side quest they got going on, is trying to figure out what these things dropped and what they could do. Because, I like doing that. They get a little bit of loot from defeating these enemies, which is nice. Something that's somewhat useful to them, especially since all of them pretty much use weapons of some kind. Like the werewolf uses guns, and so does Xanthus. So giving them kind of these, they're not really magical, but special bullets is sort of interesting to both of them. The other thing that was really cool was we had the scene in the clinic. So the main plot is that we have this vampire who's coming to collect a doctor who's like super talented, because the doctor was promised to him several years ago by her parents. It was this whole deal that went bad. So the vampire comes in. His name is Orfeo, and he sort of comes into this place, and the receptionist and Orfeo are both played by players. So it's sort of this cool interaction where we had the player, talking to this guy who's coming up here, and he's like, "Oh, hello, it's okay, so I'll let you in." And the doctor is also played by someone. So we have 3 player characters who are all interacting, and the dragon is also following Orfeo around, because they're also kind of best buddies in terms of the game. At least in general, they sort of follow each other around. They're like connected together, like they've known each other for a long time because they're both immortal. So they sort of all go into this clinic together, and what happened after that was the another guy who was like waiting to be a patient in the clinic was telling the doctor, oh, you can't just lock up yet, because they were about to lock up. It was late at night. He's like, oh, I still have an appointment. And then they figure out, well, no, you don't have an appointment. Why are you here? Who are you? And so he leaves. And he's like, oh, I'll be back. I have something, whatever. I'm not happy about this. So he leaves, and then they go upstairs and they continue talking to each other. And then they see this guy, the same guy who was in the lobby, sort of starting to climb up the window. And they're like, oh no. And then the dragon comes in, because he has super strength. I should have explained this. Like, he has the ability to give himself super strength, because he has like reptile muscles that he can activate. So he just like runs in, breaks through the window, grabs this guy's neck, and pulls him into the room. Smashes him down into the floor for tons of damage. He's not dead, but he's pretty beat up. So we're like, okay, you just smashed this guy into the floor in front of these other people. So they had to make rolls, and a lot of them actually dealt with it pretty well. They're like, okay, this guy has super strength. Okay, that's kind of insane, because he had like 9 strength, which, by the way, the human average is like 2. So you see a guy who has the strength of like, 4 people, like 4 times normal, 4 or 5 times normal, person. That's bad. It's kind of insane. So you see this guy who has 9 strength just pound this guy into the floor. It's kind of intense to watch, because the floor actually like almost broke a bit. So they're like, oh, okay, this is bad. And by the way, I didn't really bother doing a lot of the rules when it came to breaking objects with that sort of thing. I usually don't like doing rules like that unless it's, you need to get into this building to do X. If it's for dramatic effect, I usually allow people just to break really simple things that I think they'd be able to break. Like a wooden floor, if you have 9 strength, you're probably going to be able to break through that, no problem. Or at least damage the floor, which is, he was hitting this guy down into the floor. So they tie this guy up, and they're like, who are you? What are you working for? So upon examining him, because, they all have their own kind of powers that they have access to, they figure out, okay, this guy is definitely some kind of demon, in a body, obviously, like he's been possessed. This guy has been possessed by a demon and is going around trying to do something. So the police show up, because the receptionist had been calling the police. So she called the police, and the police show up, and the detective, who was in the dream before, shows up now, and he tries to get this guy to, to the police station. So they all get everyone to the police station. We have this scene where, he interviews everybody. Kind of we gloss over that sort of stuff, where it's like, oh, we interview all you, we get such information, yada, yada. And then they figured out, like, who this guy was working for, this demon, who he's working for, and, like, what he was trying to do. He was trying to get the doctor. Because apparently the theme of the campaign is kind of that everyone's after this doctor, because she had set up her character where it was like, oh, well, my family had made all these bad deals with different supernatural entities, and now everyone's after me. And she's just a mortal, so just a normal mortal. So it's kind of funny how we have, kind of a game of like, almost like capture the flag, where it's gonna be like, oh, everyone's after this one thing, and you guys have to protect it. After this one person, everyone has to protect it. So it's kind of interesting that way. But the only problem was, I think, when the detective was like telling me, oh, hey, I have these special anti-demon, handcuffs, and I know demon weaknesses, and I'm like, well, do you really? I mean, you have 3 dots in the cult, and you don't have any demon specialization, so how do I know that you know all of it, and all this stuff, and that you know it for a fact? I mean, he didn't read any of the demon books for World of Darkness. He just thinks, he knows a lot of stuff about demons in general, like, oh, they're weak to this, and they have, you can use these sigils to, like, bind them. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you could, but he didn't roll for any of this. He just said, oh, I'm going to take out these things, and then put them on this guy, and it's going to weaken him, right? I'm like, well, no, you'd need to prepare something like that beforehand. I think that was one of the only major issues I had with the campaign so far, and I posted a whole like thing about that on Facebook, and we've had some discussion about it pretty recently. And I mean, my opinion is that it's sort of a thing where, yeah, he could have he could have easily justified these things if he had actually made them, even if he had made them himself, if they were shoddily made. You know, some kind of anti-demon sigils that he crafted on these handcuffs that would make the demon weaker. I mean, maybe he could do that, but he didn't roll for it. He just kind of pulled them out of nowhere and said, oh, hey, I have this. He didn't even buy it as an artifact or something. If he had it on a sheet, like, oh, I have a 1-dot artifact or 2-dot artifact that can harm demons or affect demons, I'd be fine with it. If he said, oh, I'm going to roll to craft, like, I have handcuffs and I have, you know, some tool that I can use. I'm going to handcraft on the spot, like I know these runes, so I'm going to put them on the handcuffs. No, he pulls out these pre-prepared handcuffs out of nowhere and says, oh, I have these and they're going to work against this guy. I'm like, you don't know that for a fact. And, you know, also you don't know how the mythos of this game works, and you're assuming a mythos you know applies to this game, which isn't true. Because it doesn't. I mean, the sigils could work, but he would have needed to roll for them, which he didn't do. So I don't even know if the sigils are effective, which is going to be funny when the actual demonologist, who's Xanthus, the mage, who was in the dream before, actually finds this guy and says, hey, listen, I know a lot more about demons than you do, and you would need to reinforce the handcuffs like X or Y or whatever in order for them to work the way you want. You know, so it's going to be really interesting to see how all these characters interact. But right now, we just have those characters. We also have, I think, the other two characters who we're calling the antagonists, or the anti-heroes, because they're sort of more the villainous characters, but they have good intentions, in a way. Well, I mean, we have one character who's a pure werewolf. So he's the kind of guy who's like, oh yeah, if you don't agree with my way of thinking, then I'm going to kill you. Literally. So he's kind of playing a villain character, but he's playing a villain who is actually sort of like, in a D&D perspective, he's sort of lawful evil. So he has his own code of authority, and he's really not supposed to start fights with people unless it's absolutely necessary, but he's totally willing to kill people if they get in his way. But he's not going to just do it for no reason. He's sort of a lawful evil. Then we actually have a pirate character who's undead. Yes, undead pirate. Which is a very fun character to make, and a very fun character to watch. Basically, the first scene we played out with him, and this was going on at the same time with the werewolf, we had a scene where the pirate basically, you know, had been recently risen. I didn't make him roll to be risen because I felt like that would be kind of annoying, because if he failed that roll, then he just can't play his character, which is kind of annoying, because we kind of set it up so he would start out as a risen. Not necessarily that you'd have to earn it. Just like, oh, you start this way, it's going to be easier for you to, you know, be killed and whatever because you're in a body and you're vulnerable. But, you know, that's how you take it. So the idea was we had this scene where he basically broke out of an asylum because they threw him in an asylum because like, oh, hey, I'm a pirate from 300 years ago. How you guys doing? Like, oh, you're crazy. Let's throw you in the asylum. So he gets thrown in the asylum. He breaks out by stabbing this guard in the neck with a pair. You know, he finds the like some sharp object to use because he's made friends with a lot of the other crazies who like store shivs and weapons and whatnot. So the guy throws him a shiv. It was this really awesome roll. Like I was like, you actually have to catch this shiv in midair. It's kind of a hard roll to make. So the guy who throws it gets like 3 or 4 successes, and the guy, you know, when he tries to catch it, he got like, you know, 2 or 3 too. So it was a really cool roll, because it's like this really dramatic moment where he's like, here, you know, and he catches it, barely like cutting himself. It's like, and I said, even if you caught it like this, like it went through your body, it probably wouldn't hurt you that much. So he just kind of takes it, and then he like tricks the guard to coming inside, and then he just into his neck. And it really didn't kill him instantly, but he basically just like cut his neck, and then while the guy was weakened, he just ran out. So he starts this whole escape, and it was a really cool scene because he has the shadow, right? Because he's also a wraith, so he has this shadow basically helping him kill this guy in front of him, and the shadow actually got points, you know, because basically the way wraith works is if you do something to help the shadow or to increase your sort of dark side, you actually your dark side will actually gain points. And so by killing this guy, he's actually empowered his dark side, which is good and bad. Um, for the for the shadow, it's good, but for him, it actually brings him closer to death. But he doesn't know that. The shadow's just helping him, and it could give him extra dice too. So it's basically like, hey, I'll help you kill this guy. Here, take some extra dice. And the guy's like, oh, thanks. Oh wait, I just killed a guy. I committed a sin. Oh, I don't care. But my shadow does. I get, I have to take points for that sort of thing. I mean, he didn't actually kill a guy. He harmed a guy, so I guess it wouldn't be as bad as killing him. Kind of left him for dead, though. Just about as bad. So all these serial killers are escaping. We have the one mage who's a mind mage focused person who does a lot of mentalism and dagger play sort of thing, like she's sort of an assassin. She's running around the asylum trying to, keep everything under control. Ends up getting scared shitless by a lot of the serial killers who break out, and ends up sneaking out of the asylum without much problem. So she was good. She also wrote a whole report because she's also sort of an agent kind of character who's like reporting to, the government. This assassin. So she's like mage assassin who works for the government. So she's sort of like, hey, we've got this problem, and I think because what happened was the guy is a zombie basically, but he kind of to them, if you don't really know, Risen are very similar, like physiologically, to vampires. So I basically said, hey, you pretty much think he's a vampire because zombies aren't really very common. So I'm like, oh, you pretty much think he's a vampire because he does have this sort of same kind of general features as a vampire would. So he looks more like a vampire than a zombie. You don't really assume he's a zombie right away. So you think, oh, there's a vampire on the loose who basically broke these people out of an asylum. Like, that's pretty dangerous. She writes a report about that. And I made it very clear to the guy, like, oh, they saw you escape, so people are going to come after you. And I mean, they're on the run right now. So that's going to be kind of interesting. And now they're planning another break-in at an artifact museum, which is going to be kind of fun, because I was planning on giving them some artifacts. So I said, oh, hey, you're looking for treasure, right? Because that's one of the pirate things. Like, I want to get my treasure, Or at least the shadow is. Actually, it's the shadow that wants the treasure, not even the pirate, because the pirate's sort of this well-mannered, intelligent guy. At least somewhat well-mannered, intelligent guy who is sort of calm and charismatic. He's the pirate captain. He's kind of like Jack Sparrow without the crazy, sort of. So he's like this charismatic captain who isn't like, completely batshit bonkers. But he also has this dark side to him that it embodies the stereotypical, I want me booty, pirate kind of guy. So I find that dynamic really cool, where it's like you have this really calm, charismatic pirate captain, just opposed with, I want to kill it, I want to pillage it, I want to yar, and it's like, what the heck? So you got this pirate in your head, you got this stereotypical pirate in your head talking to like this pirate that you wouldn't expect to be a pirate kind of guy, which I thought was, I honestly think that idea is like really funny. So he has this pirate inside of his head who's telling him, hey, you want to go after your booty, you got all this treasure they stole from you, so you got to go get it back. And he's like, alright, so I'm going to plan this break-in. At the same time, we had a scene where the guy's name is Ignisco. He's sort of this Native American werewolf who basically went into this town after his pack was scattered. So his job right now is to find his pack that's been scattered around the city. It's sort of like almost like a Sonic game, or any kind of those games where you have to like, you have those NPCs who are running around like, help me, like they're in cages, you have to go rescue them. So I have like people scattered around the map where he has to like find them and bring the whole crew back, like bring his pack back together. And the same thing happened to the detective. His pack got scattered, and there's a reason for that happening to both of their packs. And that's part of the storyline. But the interesting thing is, both of them have to find their packs and bring them back together, including him. So he gets there and he's looking around for his pack, and the spirit totem that's with him, who's like this massive, fire bird, kind of like a phoenix, but like really big, like massive dire eagle, sized, kind of like Gandalf, like in the giant eagles. Like it's almost like if you imagine that combined with a fire bird kind of thing. That's kind of what it is. It's like a giant eagle bird. that has fire powers, because Ignisko's character is built around controlling fire and whatnot. So he's like this very fire focused werewolf, who's also a pure, so he's like burning and cleansing and that sort of thing. He's all about burning and cleansing and justice and all that kind of stuff. Even if it means, burning and cleansing other werewolves or humans, because he doesn't care about them. So he goes into werewolf form, and like goes near, because he like the preserve that the woods are in are right near the asylum. So like while the asylum breakout is going on, he basically grabs and nabs one of the guys and like drags him back to the spirit, because the spirit uses clairvoyance, but it needs a host. So he drags this guy and holds him down, because he had to make a roll, because the guy was actually resisting at first, so he had to hold this crazy guy down while the spirit was trying to possess him. So the spirit possesses him, and it's basically like, oh, well, here's your mission. You need to go, I know who scared away the pack. It was these creatures that we don't know about. And you need to, find someone who knows more about these kind of creatures, and also I sense one of your packmates, in the city. So you're on the right track. So I kind of gave him some hints about where, what needs to be going on next. And in the next session, I'm going to be kind of leading him towards those plot hooks, depending on where he wants to go. He can either follow up on the lead about the creatures and finding an expert in that area, because that's related to what the demons are doing. Like, the demons are these creatures that werewolves don't know a lot about. They know about spirits, but they don't know a lot about demons directly. So he has to find a demon expert, and so does pretty much everyone else in the campaign. And luckily, Xanthus is a demon expert, so I'm kind of leading the party together in a way where like they all need Xanthus's help to figure out what's going on with these demons, and Xanthus is like heavily connected with these demons. And at the same time, I have this whole plot where like he needs to also find these packmates who are scattered around the city, and we're gonna find out what's gonna happen with that in the next few sessions. For right now, I like how the campaign is going, but besides a few kind of hang-ups, like I said, with the whole misinformation on myths thing that I kind of discussed at the Facebook post. But, beyond that, I think it's going pretty well right now. Like, I have a good relationship with a lot of my players, and so far I've gotten pretty good feedback. I mean, the stuff I did with Robert the Pirate and Ignisko the Werewolf Pure were more like setting up stuff. So the first session I had was basically kind of like, they were actually two sessions, because one I did on Thursday and one I did on Friday. So the first one on Thursday was all the dream stuff and breaking, the breaking, like the break-in at the clinic and all that stuff. And then the second session was the pirate and the werewolf. So the idea right now that we have sort of set up is that it's like a big epic adventure with a lot of different characters kind of all coming together of all different kinds, for better and for worse, all kind of interacting. And it's going to be kind of fun, but it's also going to be very complicated. But so far, everyone seems to have enjoyed it. Like I said, the session with the pirate and the werewolf was more of a setting up session. The dream sequence was more just for random fun. So a lot of the stuff, the first two sessions, it would be technically, are more like a setup. And then now we're actually going to start getting into the actual, like, first real, session. And then this week. So it's going to be kind of fun to see where everything is sort of heading. And I'll be sure to let you know how it goes. That's it. Bye.